The fluorescent lights of Patterson and Associates hummed overhead as I stepped out of the elevator on the 7th floor. My watch read 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes earlier than planned. I'd managed to wrap up my client meeting downtown faster than expected, and the thought of surprising my wife with an early dinner reservation had put an extra spring in my step. We'd been married for 6 years, and these little spontaneous gestures still made her eyes light up the way they did on our first date. The reception area was empty, the weekend exodus already in full swing. I knew she'd be in her office. My wife was nothing if not dedicated, often staying late to perfect presentations or review contracts. That dedication was one of the things I loved most about her. As I walked down the familiar corridor, past the glass-walled conference rooms and rows of cubicles, I rehearsed my surprise in my head. Maybe we'd try that new Italian place she'd been talking about, or perhaps just grab takeout and spend a quiet evening at home. Her office door was slightly ajar, and I heard voices inside. I was about to knock when I recognized the second voice, Richard Thornton, her boss and senior partner at the firm. I paused, not wanting to interrupt what might be an important conversation. That's when I heard the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew. "Richard, I need to tell you something." My wife's voice carried through the gap, tinged with nervous excitement.
"I'm pregnant."
My hand froze inches from the door. A smile began to form on my face. This was wonderful news. We'd been trying for over a year, and just last month, the doctor had suggested we might want to consider fertility treatments. This was the miracle we'd been hoping for. That's wonderful news," Richard's voice responded, but there was something odd in his tone. Something cautious. "I know the timing isn't ideal with the Henderson merger coming up," she continued, "but I wanted you to hear it from me first. I'm about 10 weeks along." 10 weeks. The smile died on my lips. My mind began racing backward through the calendar, counting days, remembering. 10 weeks ago, I'd been in Seattle for an entire week, attending a mandatory training seminar for work. We'd barely spoken on the phone, both of us swamped with our respective projects. Before that, I'd had the flu for nearly 2 weeks, sleeping in the guest room to avoid infecting her, barely able to get out of bed. The math didn't work. It couldn't work. "Have you told your husband?" Richard asked, and I detected something else in his voice now. Concern? Guilt? There was a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. "Not yet. I wanted to make sure everything was stable first. You know how these things can be uncertain in the early weeks." "Of course," Richard said quickly. "Too quickly. Well, congratulations. We'll figure out the logistics with the merger. Your health and the baby's health come first." I backed away from the door silently, my heart hammering against my ribcage. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me back down the corridor, past the empty cubicles, toward the elevator. I jabbed the button repeatedly, needing to escape, needing space to think. The doors finally opened, and I stumbled inside, my reflection in the mirrored walls showing a man I barely recognized, pale, shocked, hollowed out. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed. A text from her, running a bit late. "See you at 6:30. My fingers trembled as I typed back, "No problem. Take your time." I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, my mind churning through possibilities and probabilities. Maybe I was wrong about the timeline. Maybe I'd miscounted. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But deep down, in the part of me that had always trusted my instincts, I knew. Something was very wrong. And if I was right about what I suspected, I needed proof. I needed to be absolutely certain before I acted. I started the engine and drove home, already planning my next moves. The following days were a masterclass in deception. Mine, not hers. I smiled when she came home. I asked about her day. I made dinner, folded laundry, and maintained the facade of normalcy while my world crumbled from within. She still hadn't mentioned the pregnancy, and I didn't push. Every moment of silence added another layer of confirmation to my suspicions. I became someone I never thought I'd be, a detective in my own marriage. That weekend, while she was at her Saturday morning yoga class, a routine she'd maintained religiously for years, I started my investigation. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, password protected, but I knew her passwords. We'd always been open about such things, a gesture of trust that now felt like a cruel irony. Her email revealed nothing immediately damning, just the usual work correspondence and shopping confirmations. But her calendar was more interesting. There were entries marked RC meeting going back several months, usually scheduled during lunch hours or late evenings. RC. Richard's initials were RT. But there was a Dr. Rachel Chen at the medical center downtown. I made a note and kept searching. Her phone was trickier. She kept it with her constantly now, I realized, another change I'd somehow missed while caught up in my own work. But she always showered after yoga, and sure enough, that Saturday she left it charging in the bedroom. I had maybe 10 minutes. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Text messages first, nothing unusual in the recent conversations. But then I checked the deleted messages folder, something I'd never even known to look for before my late-night internet research on how to catch a cheating spouse. I hated myself for even typing those words. There were messages there, recovered from a month ago. Can't wait to see you tonight, followed by a hotel address. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. The sender's number wasn't saved under any name, just digits. I photographed everything with my own phone, my stomach churning with each screenshot. The shower turned off. I quickly closed everything, placed her phone back exactly where she'd left it, and retreated to my home office. When she emerged, fresh and glowing, she smiled at me and asked if I wanted to grab brunch. I said yes, and we went to our favorite cafe, where I ordered pancakes I couldn't taste and made conversation that felt like pulling teeth. That afternoon, I made an excuse about needing to run to the hardware store and instead drove to the medical center. Dr. Rachel Chen's office was in the women's health wing. I sat in my car across the street for an hour, feeling pathetic and desperate, until I saw them, my wife and Richard Thornton, walking out together. He had his hand on the small of her back, that intimate gesture that told me everything I needed to know. I followed them at a distance to a coffee shop 3 blocks away. They sat at a corner table, leaning close, her hand covering his. I took photos from across the street through the window, feeling like a stalker, hating every second of it but knowing I needed documentation. Whatever was coming, I needed proof. Over the next 2 weeks, I compiled a dossier that would make a private investigator proud. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals on dates that corresponded with those RC meetings. Credit card records from restaurants we'd never been to together. Hotel receipts I found buried in her car's glove compartment during one of my darker moments. And most damning of all, I'd called the mysterious number from those deleted texts using a burner phone I'd purchased. Richard Thornton had answered. I also consulted with a lawyer, quietly, paying in cash, using a consultation service that promised discretion. I learned about divorce proceedings, asset division, and the importance of documented evidence. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd probably seen 1,000 cases like mine, advised me to be strategic. Emotion is natural, she'd said, but let's make sure you're protected financially and legally. But I didn't want just a divorce. I wanted the truth exposed. I wanted everyone who knew us, who'd smiled at our wedding photos and congratulated us on our perfect marriage, to see what had really been happening. I wanted consequences that went beyond courtroom proceedings. That's when I learned about the company dinner. My wife mentioned it casually over takeout Chinese food, 3 weeks after I'd overheard that conversation in her office. Patterson and Associates was hosting their annual award ceremony, and she'd been selected to give the keynote presentation on the Henderson merger, her biggest professional achievement. All the partners would be there, their spouses, major clients. It was the kind of career-defining moment she'd been working toward for years. "You'll come, won't you?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement that might have been genuine or might have been guilt masked as enthusiasm. "It's black tie. I know those events aren't your favorite, but it would mean a lot to have you there." I looked at my wife, the woman I'd pledged my life to, who'd apparently been living a completely different existence behind my back, and smiled. "Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for anything." She seemed relieved, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Thank you. And honey, there's something I need to tell you soon. Something important. I've just been waiting for the right moment." Whenever you're ready, I said, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath my skin. I'm not going anywhere. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me. The next week unfolded with an eerie normalcy that made me question whether I was losing my mind. My wife hummed while making breakfast, kissed me goodbye before work, and even suggested we start looking at houses in the suburbs. For the future, she'd said with a meaningful look I was clearly supposed to understand. The audacity of it was almost impressive. She was building a fantasy on top of a lie, and she expected me to play along. I played my part perfectly. I bookmarked real estate listings and nodded enthusiastically when she talked about neighborhoods with good schools. I asked about her presentation for the company dinner, offering suggestions and encouragement. At night, when she curled up against me in bed, I wrapped my arm around her and stared at the ceiling, counting the days until everything would come crashing down. My research continued with surgical precision. I'd hired a private investigator, a recommendation from my lawyer, who provided the final pieces of the puzzle. His report included time-stamped photographs of my wife and Richard entering hotels together, detailed logs of their movements, and most significantly, a recording of a conversation they'd had in his car outside her yoga studio. The investigator had used a high-powered directional microphone, and the audio quality was crystal clear. "Are you sure you don't want to wait until after the merger?" Richard's voice on the recording, concerned and intimate. The timing will never be perfect," my wife had interrupted. "I can't keep hiding this. I need to tell him about the baby, about us. He deserves to know the truth." "And then what?" Richard pressed. "We've talked about this. Your career, my position at the firm, the scandal." "I don't care about the scandal," she'd said firmly. "I care about building a real life with you. I'm tired of sneaking around. I'm tired of lying." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, discussing their plans for a future together, how they'd handle the fallout, when she'd tell me. They'd settled on doing it after the company dinner. She wanted her moment of professional triumph unmarred by personal drama. Richard had agreed, reluctantly, and they'd sealed the decision with words of affection that made me want to put my fist through a wall. Instead, I'd listened to the recording 5 times, taking notes, letting my anger crystallize into something cold and calculated. They wanted to wait until after her moment of glory? Perfect. I'd give them exactly what they wanted, and then I'd take it all away. I spent an evening crafting my presentation. Not the kind she was preparing, full of financial projections and merger synergies, but something far more impactful. I compiled every piece of evidence into a meticulously organized digital slideshow, photographs with timestamps, text message screenshots, bank statements with highlighted discrepancies, hotel receipts, and that devastating audio recording. I structured it like a story, their story, complete with a timeline that made the affair's progression impossible to deny. My brother called that week to check in, something he did periodically since our father had passed away 2 years ago. "How's married life treating you?" he asked, oblivious to the bomb about to detonate. "Interesting times," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Actually, I need a favor. That friend of yours who works in AV for corporate events, is he reliable?" "David?" "Absolutely. Why, you need something." I explained what I needed, keeping it vague enough not to raise suspicions. My brother, bless him, didn't ask too many questions. By the end of the call, I had David's number and assurances that he could help me with the technical aspects of my plan. The rented tuxedo hung in my closet like a costume for a play I never auditioned for. The night before the dinner, I tried it on and stared at my reflection. The man looking back at me seemed like a stranger, harder, colder, capable of things I'd never imagined. 6 years of marriage, reduced to this moment of calculated revenge. Was I becoming the villain in my own story? My wife appeared in the doorway, radiant in her excitement for tomorrow. "You look handsome," she said, smiling. "I'm so glad you're coming with me. This night is going to change everything." "Yes," I agreed, adjusting my bow tie. "It certainly is." That night, she finally told me about the pregnancy. We were sitting on the couch, her favorite comedy show playing on the television, when she muted it and turned to face me. Her hands were trembling slightly as she took mine. "I have something to tell you," she began, her eyes searching my face. Something wonderful and terrifying and completely unexpected. I arranged my features into an expression of curious attention, though every muscle in my body was tense. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "About 12 weeks along. I know we'd been trying, and then we stopped talking about it, and I honestly didn't think it was possible, but somehow." "That's amazing," I interrupted, pulling her into an embrace so she wouldn't see my face. "That's incredible news." She sobbed against my shoulder, relief, joy, or guilt, I couldn't tell. Maybe all three. "I was so scared to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want to get our hopes up until I was sure everything was okay." "Everything is okay," I said, my voice steady even as my heart turned to stone. "Everything is going to be fine." We held each other for a long time, and I wondered if she could feel the lie in my touch, the absence of warmth where there should have been unconditional love. If she did, she gave no sign. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and smiled at me with such apparent sincerity that I almost admired the performance. "Tomorrow night is going to be perfect," she said. "My big presentation, and now this news, and starting our family together. I feel like everything is finally falling into place." "Tomorrow night will definitely be unforgettable," I assured her, and meant every word. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel glittered with crystalline chandeliers and the polished ambitions of 200 legal professionals. I stood near the bar, nursing a scotch I had no intention of finishing, watching my wife work the room with practiced grace. She wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her figure, and despite everything, I couldn't deny she looked stunning. Several people had already complimented her pregnancy glow, though she'd only told a select few about the baby. Richard Thornton was never more than a few feet away, playing his role as the supportive boss while his eyes tracked her movements with unmistakable possessiveness. "Your wife looks absolutely radiant tonight," commented Gerald Patterson, the firm's founding partner, as he materialized beside me. He was a silver-haired man in his 60s with sharp eyes that had built an empire on reading people. "This Henderson merger has been quite the achievement. She's got a real future here." "She certainly does," I replied, taking a small sip. "Tonight should be very illuminating for everyone." If Gerald noticed the edge in my tone, he didn't show it. He continued discussing the merger's finer points while I nodded at appropriate intervals, my attention divided between his words and my watch. I had synchronized everything down to the minute with David, my brother's AV friend, who was currently in the control booth looking remarkably unremarkable in his staff uniform. The cocktail hour ended, and we moved toward our assigned tables. I'd been seated with several junior partners and their spouses, people who knew me tangentially through company functions but weren't close friends. My wife was at the head table with the senior partners and major clients, Richard Thornton prominently positioned beside her. The seating arrangement was perfect for my purposes. I wanted a clear view of the stage and everyone's reactions. Dinner was a blur of courses I couldn't taste. The woman beside me, a junior partner named Alexandra, attempted conversation about market trends and recent cases. I responded automatically, the social subroutines of polite dinner conversation running on autopilot while my mind reviewed every step of what was about to happen. Finally, dessert was cleared, and Gerald Patterson took the stage. His welcome speech praised the firm's accomplishments, highlighted key victories, and built toward the evening's main event, the presentation on the Henderson merger and the announcement of my wife's promotion to senior associate, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause as she ascended to the stage. She looked composed and confident, every inch the successful attorney she'd worked so hard to become. Richard Thornton's smile was particularly broad, and I watched him exchange a knowing glance with her that made my jaw clench. "Thank you all so much," she began, her voice clear and strong through the sound system. "When I joined Patterson and Associates 5 years ago, I never imagined I'd have the opportunity to work on a project of this magnitude." She launched into her presentation, and I had to admit it was impressive. Charts appeared on the massive screen behind her, showing financial projections and strategic advantages. She spoke about negotiations, risk mitigation, and the collaborative effort that had made the merger possible. The audience was engaged, nodding along, clearly impressed by her command of the complex details. 20 minutes into her presentation, she reached the section about future opportunities and long-term planning. And looking forward, she said, advancing to her next slide, the Henderson merger positions us for unprecedented growth in the coming years. That's when I sent the signal, a simple text message to David in the control booth, now. The slide on the screen didn't change. My wife clicked her remote again, confused. As I was saying, she clicked multiple times, frowning slightly. I apologize for the technical difficulty. I can help with that, I said, standing up from my table. My voice carried across the suddenly quiet room as I walked toward the stage. I think there's something everyone needs to see. My wife's face went from confused to alarmed as she recognized my voice. Richard Thornton half rose from his seat. I climbed the steps to the stage, and David, bless him, was already executing our plan. The screen behind my wife went black, then illuminated with a new image, a title slide that read The Real Story, a timeline of deception. What are you doing? My wife whispered, her face draining of color. This isn't. Ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the room, my voice amplified by the microphone I took from the podium. I apologize for the interruption, but I think the truth is more important than any merger presentation. The room was dead silent. 200 people stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. I clicked the remote, and the next slide appeared, a photograph of my wife and Richard Thornton entering a hotel together, timestamp clearly visible in the corner. No, my wife gasped. Please, don't. But I was already advancing to the next slide. Text messages filled the screen, intimate exchanges between her and Richard. Then bank statements, highlighting withdrawals that corresponded with hotel visits. Then more photographs, them having coffee, him with his hand on her back outside the doctor's office, them kissing in his car. Richard Thornton was on his feet now, his face purple with rage or embarrassment. This is completely inappropriate. Security. Sit down, Richard. Gerald Patterson's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a gavel. I want to see where this is going. I advanced to the next slide, the pregnancy timeline, with dates clearly marked. 3 weeks ago, I came to surprise my wife with dinner, I said, my voice remarkably steady. Instead, I overheard her telling Richard that she was pregnant. 10 weeks pregnant, to be precise. I let that sink in, watching the mental calculations happen across dozens of faces. The interesting thing about 10 weeks is that it puts conception right around the time I was in Seattle for a week. Before that, I had the flu and was quarantined in our guest room. The math, as they say, doesn't work out in my favor. My wife was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. I'd cried myself out weeks ago, during those long nights when I'd first started gathering evidence. The final slide appeared, an audio player icon. I clicked it, and the recording filled the ballroom. My wife and Richard discussing their affair, their plans for the future, how they'd handle telling me about the baby. Their voices echoed off the elegant walls, each word another nail in the coffin of their reputations. When it finished, the silence was absolute. The seconds following the audio recording stretched like hours. I stood on that stage, bathed in the spotlight meant for my wife's moment of triumph, and watched the carefully constructed facades crumble around me. My wife had sunk to her knees, her midnight blue gown pooling around her like spilled ink. Richard Thornton remained frozen in his chair, his face a mask of utter devastation. The 200 witnesses sat in stunned silence, their champagne glasses forgotten, their gossip-hungry minds working overtime to process what they'd just witnessed. Gerald Patterson was the first to move. He rose from his seat with deliberate slowness, his expression unreadable. Richard, my office. Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. His voice carried the weight of decades of authority. You've jeopardized not just your career, but this firm's reputation and the Henderson merger itself. He turned to my wife. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive information about severance and benefits through our HR department. Gerald, please, Richard began, but the founding partner held up a hand. I don't want to hear it. Not here, not now. Gerald looked at me, and something in his expression might have been respect or pity or both. Young man, you have my sincerest apologies for what you've endured. If you need a recommendation for a divorce attorney, I know several excellent ones. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The adrenaline that had carried me through the presentation was fading, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. I descended from the stage, and the crowd parted before me like the Red Sea. Some faces showed sympathy, others avid curiosity, and a few, mostly the younger associates, looked at me with something like awe at what I'd just done. My wife's voice stopped me at the ballroom entrance. "Wait. Please." She'd stumbled after me, mascara streaking her face, one hand unconsciously protecting her abdomen. "Can we talk? Just for a minute." Every instinct screamed at me to keep walking, but something, maybe the ghost of the love I'd once felt, maybe just morbid curiosity, made me pause. We moved to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, far from prying eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know that's not enough. I know nothing I say can fix this. But I need you to know I never meant for it to happen. Richard and we started working late together, and it just—" "Save it," I interrupted, my voice cold. "I don't need the story of how it happened. I don't care about the justifications or the rationalizations. You made choices, repeatedly, over months. You looked me in the eye every single day and lied." "I was going to tell you," she insisted. "After tonight, I was going to tell you everything and ask for a divorce. I swear." "You were going to tell me after you secured your promotion and your moment of glory," I corrected. "You wanted to have it all, the career achievement, the new relationship, and whatever scraps of dignity you could salvage from our marriage. Well, congratulations. You got quite a moment tonight, just not the one you planned." She flinched as if I'd struck her. "The baby is not my concern," I said flatly, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "I've consulted with an attorney. DNA testing will be part of the divorce proceedings. If by some miracle it's mine, we'll discuss custody and support. If it's Richard's, which we both know it is, then you two can figure out your happy family together." "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice small. "We don't go anywhere. You go to a hotel tonight. My lawyer will contact you on Monday with the divorce papers. Don't come back to the house except to collect your things, and only when I'm not there. We'll arrange a time through our attorneys." "You hate me," she said, not a question. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something surprising. "No," I said honestly. "I don't hate you. I don't really feel anything for you at all anymore. That's what you killed these past few months. Not just my love, but any emotion at all." I left her there in the lobby, crumpled and crying, and walked out into the cool night air. My phone had 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. My brother, friends who'd heard through the grapevine, even my mother somehow already knew. The speed of gossip in the digital age was truly remarkable. I drove to my brother's house without calling first. He opened the door in his pajamas, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that in private over the past weeks, but I let him hold me up while the reality of what I'd just done crashed over me like a wave. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "She needed to face consequences, and so did that bastard boss of hers." "I destroyed her career," I said. "In front of everyone she works with, everyone she respects." "She destroyed her own career," he corrected. "You just made sure people knew the truth. That's not revenge, brother. That's justice." Over the next few days, I learned just how far the ripples of that night extended. Richard Thornton resigned from Patterson and Associates before they could fire him. The Henderson merger hung in the balance while the firm scrambled to contain the scandal, ultimately reassigning the project to a team of 3 senior partners. My wife moved in with Richard, a detail I learned through the divorce attorney, and the irony wasn't lost on me that she'd finally gotten the relationship she wanted, just not under the circumstances she'd imagined. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly swift. She didn't contest anything, perhaps out of guilt or perhaps because her attorney advised her she had no leg to stand on. The house would be sold and assets divided. The DNA test confirmed what we both already knew: the baby wasn't mine. I felt nothing when I received that result, which probably meant I was healing or had simply gone numb. Either way, it was closure. 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop downtown, reviewing paperwork for the small consulting firm I'd started. Leaving my corporate job had been terrifying but liberating. I'd taken my savings, my severance, and my half of the house sale and built something entirely my own. It wasn't glamorous yet, but it was honest, and it was mine. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, a woman I'd met at a business networking event 3 weeks ago. We were taking things slowly, coffee dates and long conversations, building something on a foundation of truth rather than deception. "Still on for dinner tonight?" she asked. "Absolutely," I typed back, and meant it. The barista called my name, and as I walked up to collect my coffee, I caught my reflection in the shop window. The man looking back at me wasn't the hollow-eyed ghost from 6 months ago. He wasn't quite whole yet, but he was getting there. The betrayal had broken something in me, but I was learning that broken things could be rebuilt, sometimes into something stronger than before. My ex-wife had given birth 3 months ago, a boy I'd heard through mutual acquaintances I couldn't quite shake off. She and Richard were struggling, apparently. The relationship that had seemed so exciting in secret was suffocating in the light of day. They were trapped together by circumstance and consequence, bound by the child they'd created and the wreckage of the lives they'd destroyed to be together. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, no vindictive pleasure in their misery. That surprised me. I'd expected the anger to last longer, to fuel me through the difficult months. Instead, it had burned out, leaving behind only a profound sense of relief that I'd discovered the truth when I did, before I'd wasted more years on a lie. The evening sun painted the city in shades of gold as I walked back to my car. Somewhere in this sprawling metropolis, my ex-wife was probably changing diapers and arguing with Richard about whose turn it was for the 2 a.m. feeding. Somewhere else, the legal partners who'd witnessed that night were still gossiping about the most dramatic company dinner in Patterson and Associates' 50-year history. But I was here, moving forward, building a life that was authentically mine. The scar tissue from the betrayal would always be there. I'd be more careful with my trust, more cautious with my heart. But I refused to let her actions define me or poison my future. 3 weeks after arriving early and overhearing a conversation that shattered my world, I'd stood on that stage and reclaimed my narrative. 5 months later, I'd signed divorce papers and closed that chapter of my life. And now, sitting in my car with dinner plans and business prospects and the tentative hope of something real with someone honest, I finally understood something crucial. The best revenge wasn't the public humiliation or the destroyed career or even the truth laid bare for all to see. The best revenge was this: moving forward, building something better, and refusing to let betrayal turn me into someone bitter and broken. I started the engine and pulled into traffic, heading toward dinner and whatever came next. Behind me, the past receded in the rearview mirror, still visible but growing smaller with each mile. Ahead, the road stretched out full of possibilities I'd never imagined when I'd stepped off that elevator 3 weeks early and heard the words that changed everything. I was free, I was healing, and I was finally, genuinely moving forward. The story had ended exactly where it needed to, not with revenge or reconciliation, but with release.